Ever since I discovered my husband's infidelity, I've been plotting to drain our joint marital assets. Divorce means splitting everything, making his mistress the biggest winner. So, I decided to bankrupt the company. No assets, nothing to split. We'd all be poor, and then I'd start over. After all, I built this company from the ground up, while he just reaped the rewards and complained about the lines on my face. The mistress? My own relative. I helped her immensely, and she repaid me with betrayal and a mouthful of phlegm. So I scorched the earth, a pyrrhic victory if ever there was one. While my husband lay comatose after a car accident, I swiftly dismantled the company. Jing Xinin, the mistress, finally cracked. She ran to me, crying, "Sister, was I worth all this?" I nodded. Proud of yourself? They call that the face that launched 1,000 ships. When Wu Gang, my husband, woke up, he sat in stunned silence for 3 days. His first words were, "What was the point?" I smiled. I lost money, but I won a spiritual victory. He smashed everything he could reach, calling me a mad dog. But it was just impotent rage. I'd already prepared my escape route. I wasn't going down with them. I'd just arrived home after a grueling 14-hour flight and was about to sleep when another one of her bragging messages arrived. Pictures, text, the whole 9 yards. Wu Gang, ignoring his demanding work schedule, patiently crouched beside her son's desk, helping him with his homework. Wu Gang, despite a long day, hoisted her daughter onto his shoulders for a piggyback ride around the house. New additions to the villa, already lavishly decorated to her taste. More gifts for her. She usually detailed her ever-expanding wardrobe and shoe collection, but spared me the specifics this time. Compared to the earth-shattering shock of the first revelation, I now felt a strange sense of boredom. Wu Gang walked up to me, picked up my phone, saw Jing Xinin's message, and frowned. I didn't expect him to reprimand her for her insensitivity. She wouldn't dare if she wasn't certain of impunity. Sure enough, he simply handed the phone back to me, his face almost devoid of guilt. "No matter what," he soothed, "she'll never be more important than you. Lin Shi, remember our agreement? Focus on our careers, then start a family. We said you'd have children at 35. Why not a few years earlier? We never imagined we'd become successful so quickly. Plans change. I'll be a good father. I'll especially love your children. I promise, your children will want for nothing, just like hers." I watched his lips move, finding it all absurdly comical. He wouldn't divorce, maintained his double life, simply because he feared losing half his fortune. They say divorce is like bankruptcy. Now, he wanted to tie me to him with a child. How delusional. I furrowed my brow, pretending to consider his proposal. He actually believed me, crouching down to coax me. "I know those other women are only after my money. You're the only one who truly cares for me. How could I not cherish you?" I laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. Staring into his eyes, I said, "Wu Gang, your suggestion is a bit much. You've probably never been betrayed. That's why you can say such things so easily. I won't even talk about you. After all, you've spent years brainwashing me with the idea that successful men are expected to have affairs. I've heard it all before. Let's just talk about Jing Xinin. She's my distant cousin, poorly educated, unskilled, lazy, can't even hold down a cashier job. Her mother practically begged me on her knees to give her a job at the company. And now? What's her mother's attitude? We're not even close, who knows who? That's the kind of ungrateful thing she says. I lived in this apartment for years, and the moment Jing Xinin gets pregnant, she moves into a villa. My aunt then takes my mother to see it, making her so angry she falls ill. How did my mother treat you? Do you think she deserved that? I wanted to ask you, with all the women in the world, why her? Why someone so morally bankrupt, someone who takes betrayal so lightly? Why are you so willing to debase yourself? Then I realized, you're the same. Birds of a feather flock together. Wu Gang shot to his feet, his chest heaving with anger. He glared at me, speechless. I knew he was thinking, don't push it, don't make me punish you. The next second, he grabbed his coat, slammed the door, and went to his soulmate. If I wouldn't obey, someone else would. I learned about Wu Gang's car accident just after waking up. The line between dream and reality was still blurred. My assistant called, telling me he was in the ICU, severely injured. The doctor's saying he'd be in a coma for a long time. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog, but it only thickened. I splashed cold water on my face, finally coming to my senses. This was a gift from heaven. My chance to act had finally arrived. This wasn't the script I'd written for him, but who could write a better one than fate? I took a deep breath, feeling a surge of elation. I began to execute the plan I'd been harboring for so long, the plan to ruin the company. First, the legal procedures. With Wu Gang incapacitated, I assumed his role as legal representative. At the same time, all the signatures signifying control of the company landed on my desk. Then, I made my move. First, I distributed all available liquid funds as dividends. The shareholders had no objections, they'd been wanting dividends for ages, but Wu Gang had been suppressing the board. I gave them 8 years' worth of dividends all at once. They were practically drooling. They'd not only recouped their investments, but made a killing. Now, they wouldn't care what I did. I had free rein. Next, I sold all raw materials and fixed assets. The proceeds went to severance packages for the employees, packages so generous they were unprecedented. This only consumed a portion of the funds. The rest went to breach of contract penalties. The company had several major clients. I couldn't fulfill the delivery contracts, and according to the agreements, I had to pay penalties. With that, the company was essentially gutted. Watching the client base Wu Gang had bled for, fought for, crumble before my eyes, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Ruining him financially meant ruining him completely. He'd experienced immense wealth and extravagant spending. This sudden fall from grace would break him, psychologically. I couldn't wait to watch him suffer. He treated his family as an afterthought. Now, with his financial foundation shattered, his whole life would collapse. I hoped he enjoyed the experience. And I anticipated the inevitable fallout between him and Jing Shinin when the money ran out. I had a feeling it would be spectacular. We, as a couple, held the majority of the company shares, receiving the largest dividends. How best to squander this money? I considered donating it, but feared Wu Gang would sue me for disposing of marital assets without his consent. So, I started buying up unsold fruit from struggling farmers. And then I let it rot in warehouses. I mortgaged the factory equipment and land, squandering the money. As for myself, I'd been preparing ever since I discovered his affair 3 years ago. I'd had him buy me jewelry, which wouldn't be considered joint property in a divorce. I'd bought properties for my parents and family under the guise of gifts. I'd invested small amounts of money in our African branch, which was now a financial black hole. Honestly, even I couldn't untangle it anymore. But the core operation was still there, under my control. Why not invest more there? Because Wu Gang wasn't stupid. Money in Africa was money out of his reach. He wouldn't have allowed it. So I'd played the long game, moving small amounts at a time. Now, our marital assets were gone, and I had my escape route, ready to rebuild my life. Everything was within the legal framework. I wouldn't touch anything illegal, like hiding assets during a divorce. Now, all that remained was to wait for Wu Gang to wake up. I hoped he'd enjoy this stripped bare, unburdened state of being. I couldn't wait to watch the show. I sat by Wu Gang's bedside, listening to my lawyer update me on the progress of reclaiming marital assets from Jing Xining, while simultaneously directing others to use those assets to buy up more surplus agricultural products. Everything had to be done quickly. Ideally, there would be nothing left by the time Wu Gang woke up. I sighed. It wasn't easy dismantling what I'd built. I was the one who started the company. I was the only original member. This self-destructive act pained me. But I had no other choice. Jing Xining arrived before Wu Gang regained consciousness. She usually operated in the shadows, only daring to taunt me after the birth of her second child. This was the first time she'd confronted me directly. She wasn't highly educated, but she was clever. As a mistress, she was highly skilled. She arrived full of bluster, but the moment she saw me, she couldn't meet my gaze. Then, gathering her courage, she said, "Sister, you're crazy. You just wanted to get back at me, right? Was I worth all this?" I was fiddling with a wooden block castle Wu Gang had bought for her daughter. As her words trailed off, I yanked out the bottom layer. The blocks tumbled, collapsing into a heap of ruins. I smiled at her. This is what the face that launched 1,000 ships looks like. Do you like it? Are you proud? You wanted Wu Gang to divorce me and split his assets. He couldn't do it. So I did it for him. Now you can get married. Happy? And don't say it was just you. You have your shameless parents behind you, your illegitimate children hidden away. I want you to have nothing. I want them to have nothing. I want to see karma in action. Heaven works too slowly, so I'll do it myself. I don't want your trash. But I can't stand your smug, undeserved triumph. You're mediocre, with nothing to offer but a thick skin and a black heart. And I, for someone like you, orchestrated this entire elaborate plan. Don't you think life is interesting? I watched her, mocking, smiling. I laughed until tears welled up. She wiped her own tears, spitting out a threat. Just wait until Wu Gang wakes up. He'll deal with you. I roared with laughter. When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. A dethroned phoenix is no better than a chicken. When he wakes up, he'll be just another ordinary person, struggling to survive. Watching Jing Xining's retreating figure, I felt a surge of satisfaction. The last vestiges of resentment vanished. A great man once said, one must have the courage to break old conventions. As the empire crumbled, I went to the most luxurious hotel on the Bund, ordering a table full of delicacies. I raised my glass, standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the bustling city. The Huangpu River flowed ceaselessly towards the sea, flanked by towering skyscrapers, their lights dazzling. 30 years of reform and opening up, its essence distilled in this view. I looked back, my heart filled with a mix of emotions. Rewinding time, back to the early 2000s, the struggles of those early entrepreneurial days were etched deep in my memory. Wu Gang and I were college sweethearts, married with nothing. I was a country girl. A Phoenix woman escaping rural poverty. He was an ordinary city boy, his mother laid off, his father the sole breadwinner. We were in the same class, same department, same university. After graduation, we both landed jobs at the same state-owned enterprise. We hadn't been there long when restructuring hit. The company, in a gesture of goodwill, offered to keep one of us. In our cramped, dimly lit rented room, we sat in silence. Then he took my hand. "I'll leave. I'm a man. I can make my own way." I shook my head. This isn't a long-term solution. This is just the first wave. Isn't your uncle going to transfer you? That's a real iron rice bowl. I should be the one to leave. Through tears, Wu Gang choked out, "Don't worry. We'll split every penny we have." I nodded, my heart filled with uncertainty and fear. I was an accountant at the state-owned enterprise, but the work was so specialized that I, a materials accountant, didn't even know how to write a check. finding a new job was proving difficult. Undeterred, I went to every interview I could find. One day, I ended up at a construction company far from home. The interview was at a construction site. It hadn't been raining when I left, but by the time I arrived, it was pouring. I trudged through the mud towards the office, and then, I fell into a pit. At the hospital, they diagnosed a bruised knee and sprained ligaments. I needed rest. Money drained away like water. Our savings quickly dwindled. Wu Gang borrowed money from everyone he knew. I watched him, lips chapped, hands trembling, as he handed the money to the cashier. When he turned back to me, his eyes were filled with relief. Strangely, despite the hardship, I never felt lost, disappointed, or truly pained. Hardship and illness are often intertwined. But there's also a saying, when things are at their worst, they begin to mend. The construction company called. When could I start? I'd been hired. Excitedly, I told them I'd need 2 weeks to recover, then another 3 months of light duty. The doctor had actually recommended 6 months of rest. But I couldn't afford it. We were in debt. I couldn't sit still. My job was still managing materials. My predecessor had left behind a mess of accounts. I had to handle the current workload while cleaning up the old mess. It was challenging, often requiring late nights. I knew this job was precious, so I never complained. But sometimes, the old errors would trip me up. I'd make mistakes. I was terrified. Then I realized the suppliers didn't seem to care. Some had competent accountants who corrected my errors. Others didn't even notice. Later, a colleague told me these bosses were all making a killing, with huge profit margins. I took note. One supplier, Oldley, dealt in cable trays. His accountant was part-time, which led to frequent errors. He made mistakes, I made mistakes. We often struggled through reconciliations. And in the process, we became acquainted. One day, Oldley told me he was planning to open a storefront and wanted me to run it as his agent. Would I be interested in working with him? The thought of quitting filled me with anxiety, but the allure of making real money was too strong to resist. I discussed it with Wu Gang. He disapproved. We just paid off our debts. Can't you take a break? I nodded, not arguing, but the seed was planted. I secretly quit my job and joined Oldley. I handled sales at the storefront, while he went out drumming up business at construction sites. My salary was a base plus commission. I soon learned that Oldley had a small factory, producing his own cable trays. He wasn't actually a distributor for a large southern factory, as he often boasted. But that didn't concern me. I focused on my work at the store. To boost sales, I never stopped thinking. If my sales figures weren't high enough, my monthly income wouldn't even match my accounting salary. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't be a burden on our family again. The pressure was immense. My hair was falling out in clumps. When sales were slow, I regretted leaving the stability of my old job. But I adjusted my mindset, refusing to let negativity consume me. I learned on the job. In my free time, I researched store marketing strategies. But I was still inexperienced, my methods rudimentary. Besides cable trays, the store sold other hardware products. Everything was neatly organized, a full range of goods. But many customers would just browse and leave, no matter how welcoming I was. They refused to divulge any information. I couldn't get a conversation going. I was getting desperate. But there were things I could do. I started a logbook, meticulously recording the time of each customer's visit, their clothing, their inquiries. Then I gave it to Oldley. The first time I presented him with my logbook, he was stunned. He sat down slowly, carefully reviewing the entries, his fingers tapping the table. After a while, he looked up at me, his face alight with excitement. So, you're saying these people are likely procurement officers from construction sites? I've been running around trying to drum up business, and you've been providing me with leads? I nodded. Oldly beamed, repeating, good, good, good. My efforts translated into success for Oldly. He often returned empty-handed from his visits to unfamiliar construction sites. With my intel, he could quickly identify the decision-makers and understand their needs. He didn't have to close every deal, just one extra sale was enough to boost his monthly performance. At the end of the month, Oldly gave me a bonus, declaring, "You're a genius." I could only laugh. My own sales hadn't improved much. But seeing Oldly's success gave me confidence. After some trial and error, I realized that customers were most guarded when they first entered the store. The key was to quickly put them at ease, to establish a modicum of trust. I developed a set of phrases to lower their defenses. For example, "You're my first customer today. I wonder if we'll do business together?" This seemingly simple sentence conveyed multiple layers of meaning, a result of combining practical experience with theoretical knowledge. It worked. My store's sales figures became the best in the entire hardware and electrical market. Much later, looking back from a position of success, I realized the foundation of my empire was built brick by brick, with my own 2 hands. Wu Gang's lavish spending, the mistress's designer shoes and bags, all that luxury stemmed from my early, painstaking efforts. I hadn't worked so hard for her happiness, but for my own. Being a stepping stone for others felt terrible. Even though Wu Gang had played a crucial role later on, the thought of splitting everything in a divorce was unbearable. I could donate my money to charity, but I couldn't reward wickedness. My hard work made the hardware store flourish. But life isn't always a straight line. Trouble struck back home for Oldly, forcing him to close up shop. He left in a hurry. Unable to sell the store, he transferred it to me, agreeing to installment payments. During our final reconciliation, he said wistfully, "I wish we could have continued working together." I took it as a casual remark. He turned to leave, quickly starting his car. Then I noticed his wallet on the counter. I ran after him. He got out of the car. It was dark. I couldn't see his expression. He took the wallet, then said in a low voice, "My wife, all she does is eat, drink, gamble." It started small, but it escalated. Now she's involved in serious gambling. I'm going home to deal with the mess, to divorce her. My brother has a successful factory, far beyond my small operation. He's offered to help me with his resources and connections. Combined with my skills, I'm confident about the future. If, and I mean if, everything goes well, would you be willing to come find me? I stood there, dumbfounded. His words were too much to process. He clarified, "I mean, when the time comes, you could come find me. We could start as boyfriend and girlfriend. What do you think? Knowing you, we could even get married directly." "Wait," I interrupted, "I'm married." "What are you saying?" He waved his hand dismissively. "The men here, they seem impressive, but they lack ambition. Content with their meager salaries, their iron rice bowls. I don't respect that. With your talent, you're destined for greatness. It's only a matter of time before you and your husband part ways." His words stunned me. I was speechless. He glanced at me again. "Loyalty is a virtue, but too much loyalty is just stubbornness. With me, even if you don't want to be a housewife. If you still want to pursue your career, I can help you achieve your goals in half the time. Think about it. I'll wait for your answer." He got back in his car and drove off, leaving me standing there, speechless. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows, calling my name in a low voice. "Lin Shi." It was Wu Gang. I was shocked and terrified. I didn't know how much of Old Lee's speech he'd overheard. Old Lee and I had always maintained a professional relationship. I had never considered anything else, not even in my thoughts. But this one time, this one moment of impulsive confession, Wu Gang had to be there to hear it. And how did he know I worked here? When did he find out? My head was spinning. I quickly ushered him inside. He nodded numbly, following me in. I tried to reassure him. Oldley is going back home for good. He was just rambling. We're just business partners. I've never thought of him that way. I opened my QQ Messenger, showing him my chat history with Oldley. Everything looked perfectly normal. Wu Gang stared at the screen for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed, his expression a mixture of hurt and restraint. I quickly explained my job change, confessing my ambitions and offering a sincere apology. Changing jobs was a risky move. The accounting job at the construction site was hard-earned. I shouldn't have kept it from you. That's why I've been so stressed. Pushing myself so hard. But I don't regret it. I know one thing for sure, in life, you either move forward or you fall behind. While you're resting, content with mediocrity, there are others striving relentlessly, fighting for something more. Wu Gang pondered for a moment, then nodded slowly. That's how successful people think. I've become too complacent. He sighed, looking at me with a mixture of admiration and a hint of self-consciousness. I shook my head, taking his hand. You've given me a stable foundation. Then I added, I'm just starting out. I wouldn't call myself successful. You're praising me prematurely. I don't deserve it. He said thoughtfully, I'll work hard to become better, so you won't look down on me. I promise. I'm proud of you, and I'll never give you reason to be ashamed of me. Our relationship became stronger after that. See, back then, his motivation was so simple. He just didn't want me to look down on him. But later, everything changed. Years later, as he juggled mistresses, treating our home like a hotel and our marriage like a joke, I would remember that day. I knew Oldley's words, bottled up for so long, were not empty promises. When I was young, I could have taken shortcuts, using my looks to advance. I rejected more than just the thrill of an affair. I gave up an easier path to success. If I'd lowered my moral standards, I could have avoided so much hardship. Temptations were everywhere, but I remained faithful to my family and my values. So, when Wu Gang's newfound wealth corrupted him, when he so easily abandoned his moral compass, I couldn't understand. Was it really so difficult to stay true to one person for a lifetime? Hadn't I done it? Why couldn't he? The day Oldley left, Wu Gang's arrival forced me to come clean. It was a relief. I was tired of lying about my work. I brought my younger brother, Lin Su, from our hometown. He had found a job after graduating from a vocational college. I brought him here to help me. He would manage the store, freeing me to go out and secure contracts. All our money was tied up in the business. I couldn't afford a car. In the beginning, I traveled by bus. I'd often have to walk long distances from the bus stop to reach the construction sites. I endured harsh weather, hunger, and exhaustion. But I held on to my dreams. Thankfully, my foundation was solid. I didn't make rash business decisions. Business steadily improved. When I finally got my driver's license and bought a car, I cried. I no longer had to measure the earth with my feet. But physical hardship paled in comparison to emotional distress. The condescending looks were harder to bear than the long journeys. Even though I'd established relationships with several construction sites, every new site, every new client, often meant facing disdain, even being thrown out. My perseverance stemmed from pure conviction. Fortunately, my efforts paid off. I knew I was on the right path, so I worked even harder. A vice president at a construction company, Mr. Zhang, took a particular interest in me. He warned me that the hardware business would decline, as larger distributors were targeting even small construction projects. He advised me to focus on tiling and waterproofing, two services that general contractors always subcontracted. He suggested I start a small factory, produce the materials, secure subcontracts, and handle the installation myself. Low investment, high returns, low barrier to entry. At the end of the year, my brother brought his fiancée home to meet me. I took the opportunity to announce my plans. My sister-in-law would manage the store, my brother would continue securing contracts. And I would use our earnings to start a new factory. Tiling was booming, but there were no local tile factories. All the tiles were shipped from the neighboring city. I was perfectly positioned. We made money, a lot of money. I later heard someone say that it only takes 2 or 3 years for a person to rise to prominence. How true that was. With the profits, besides expanding the tile factory and upgrading equipment, I also invested in waterproofing. Once involved, I realized just how profitable it was. A true goldmine. And with significant room for growth. High-quality waterproofing materials were scarce. Many existing materials required extensive maintenance, leading to deductions from warranty payments. Eventually, tiles fell out of fashion, but waterproofing remained. With substantial capital, I began researching and developing new waterproofing materials. By the time I dismantled the company, I had a unique formula. Developed in collaboration with a university professor. Throughout this period, Wu Gang was busy with his mistresses and illegitimate children, completely oblivious to my endeavors. He showed no interest in my work. After the divorce, this formula would be my ticket back to the top. Later, a contractor from our hometown contacted my brother, proposing a partnership. By then, I was intimately familiar with the construction industry. We formed a construction team, established a company, and started bidding directly for projects from developers. We weren't a fly-by-night operation. Our estimators, construction workers, and technical experts were all highly reputable engineers I'd carefully identified over the years. I paid top dollar to recruit them, not just to meet licensing requirements, but to ensure technical excellence and client satisfaction. In the beginning, we could only handle a few low-rise buildings. As profits grew, so did opportunities and challenges. We could now build high-rises, but our capital was limited. One tower crane could service 4 high-rises simultaneously, but I only had enough money for 2. This meant wasted resources, as crane rentals were expensive. I gritted my teeth and took out a loan. For buildings it was a gamble. If the funding dried up, if I failed, all my efforts would be for nothing. Fortunately, we rode the wave of rapid economic growth. I succeeded. To recoup their investment quickly, the developer gave me a building as payment. It was a so-called debt-offsetting property. From signing the contract to receiving the title, the property value skyrocketed, multiplying my assets several times over. I was now in the billions. I could take on even larger projects. Looking back, that was my most glorious year, also the year everything changed. One day, while inspecting a construction site, surrounded by my team, a piece of debris fell from above, striking my safety helmet. I blacked out. I woke up in the hospital, gazing into Wu Gang's concerned, bloodshot eyes. He looked distraught. The doctors said there was a shadow on my brain requiring further investigation. I had a dislocated shoulder, a broken arm, and multiple joint dislocations throughout my body, requiring extensive rehabilitation. Late at night, the hospital room was brightly lit. My reflection stared back at me from the window. Wearing a hospital gown, my face grim, my expression desolate. That day, we decided that Wu Gang would take over my work. I would go home to recover and prepare for pregnancy. By then, Wu Gang had made some progress in his state-owned enterprise job, but it paled in comparison to being the head of a construction company. I was the one out in the field, he was the support system. My career trajectory was meteoric. He watched, both supportive and envious. I sensed his frustration, but he never said a word. The accident wasn't random. I was rising too fast, stepping on too many toes. Wu Gang would face the same dangers. We had a long talk. I want to entrust the company to you, I said. I have hundreds of employees depending on me. I can't afford to fail. I need someone capable to lead them, and you're more suited for this than Lin Su. But it's dangerous. If you're not willing, Lin Su can take over. Wu Gang gripped my hand, tears in his eyes, nodding resolutely. Focus on your recovery. I won't let you down. Wouldn't let me down? But later, he let down even me. Sometimes, remembering his promise, I would laugh until I cried. After his vow, his voice choked with emotion, he continued, "You've suffered so much over the years. It pains me, as a man, to be under your wing. Now it's my turn. Don't worry. I'll make this company bigger and stronger. I'll be the man you deserve. I know people have been mocking you, a woman in this business. They've been insinuating that I'm incompetent. I'll prove them wrong. I'll take care of you. You'll be safe under my protection." I was deeply moved. Now, it all seems so absurd. He certainly took good care of his mistress and her family. He used me as a stepping stone, climbing to greater heights. From then on, he forgot about taking care of me. He assumed I could take care of myself. He saw a bigger world, and I was no longer in it. How things change. I began my semi-retirement. After the initial treatment, I started the long process of rehabilitation. After the first phase, the doctors advised me to live as normally as possible. Even though strenuous activity caused discomfort, I had to push through it. I wanted to travel, to clear my head. Wu Gang agreed. He quickly adapted to his new role. He was a natural leader, more organized and meticulous than I was, more adept at building relationships. Compared to his refined management style, my approach was admittedly rough around the edges. But I was still leagues ahead of other contractors. This made our company incredibly powerful. After weathering fierce competition, Wu Gang finally integrated into the company, becoming the chairman in every sense of the word. At the end of the year, during the dividend distribution, he didn't buy anything for himself. He only asked what I wanted. "I've neglected my family for too long," I said. "I want to improve their lives." Without hesitation, he bought a large house for my parents and showered me with jewelry and luxury goods. As for my brother, who already had his own shares, Wu Gang still gave him a generous gift. I said to Wu Gang sincerely, "This is enough jewelry and luxury goods. Don't buy any more. It's just for show. This is plenty. You'll be attending more business functions. You should buy some for yourself." He pulled me into a tight embrace, deeply moved. "With a wife like you, what more could I ask for?" I hugged him back, our hearts close. "These things mean nothing to me. My sights are set on bigger things." He laughed, his chest rumbling. "I understand, my love. You want a yacht. Only a yacht can satisfy your desire for both the stars and the sea." We laughed together. That was probably the peak of our relationship. As for what came after, there is no after. I didn't spend the money, but other women gladly did, lavishing on luxuries with my hard-earned cash. And the yacht? We bought it, but barely used it. My joints were already giving me trouble, and the sea breeze made the pain unbearable. That yacht never witnessed the fulfillment of our vows, but it did witness Wu Gang's descent into depravity. I lost count of how many women graced its deck. At the time, I was glad I'd made the decision to step back. Wu Gang could not only hold his position as chairman and manage the team, but he also excelled at networking, especially with developers. Construction is a man's world. A woman who refuses to flirt is quickly marginalized. But Wu Gang, honed by his years in the state-owned enterprise, was a master of social maneuvering. He thrived at those endless business dinners and drinking sessions, securing numerous projects for the company. The business expanded rapidly, and our wealth grew exponentially. On Wu Gang's birthday, we gathered the whole family, raising our glasses, cheering in unison. 10 years of hard work had culminated in this moment. Our friends and family rejoiced with us. Little did I know, it would be our last happy gathering. From then on, things would never be the same. Back then, it felt like any other celebration. I built our business from scratch, from 0 to 1. He took it from 1 to 10. Which is more important? The answer is obvious. But Wu Gang didn't see it that way. He quickly became arrogant. He believed my success was due to hard work and luck, nothing more. He dismissed my vision, my instincts, my drive. He even looked down on Mr. Zhang, the vice president who had given me my first break in the industry. At a dinner party, he sneered, "After all these years, even my wife is more successful than him. He's still just a vice president." When I heard about it, I was furious. Back then, he still listened to me. He knew he'd made a mistake. He brought lavish gifts to Mr. Zhang to apologize, but was turned away. He shrugged it off, seemingly unconcerned. I later learned that he never regained Mr. Zhang's respect. Around that time, I was in Yunnan, partly for leisure, partly to explore new opportunities. I discovered a local herbal tea produced by Young Wazeo Pharmaceutical and thought it was fantastic. I wanted to become a distributor. After several meetings, they declined. I met all their financial requirements, but they demanded 5 years of experience in the fast-moving consumer goods industry. I thought long and hard, then decided to start from scratch, to gain experience in that industry. If I couldn't partner with a large company, I would start with smaller brands. Once I had the necessary experience, I would approach Young Wazeo again. In the meantime, I invested in their stock. I was confident in their growth potential. Within a year, their stock price doubled. Later, I would reflect on this, how even during my convalescence, I was still striving to create value, to increase our wealth. But it was all for nothing. I was building an empire for Wu Gang and his mistress. When it came to squandering money, I was no match for him. The first time I heard rumors of his affair, I was incredulous. I dismissed them as gossip. Then someone sent me a photo. I had so many contacts on WeChat, I couldn't even remember who this person was. In the photo, taken at a dinner party, a slender, stylishly dressed woman sat on Wu Gang's lap. He gazed at her with a look of infatuation. I scoffed. It was just the angle of the photo. Wu Gang wouldn't betray me. I knew the industry was rife with infidelity, but I trusted him. Besides, who would be so kind as to inform me? I didn't believe in such altruism. I was quickly proven wrong. Soon after, a video arrived. An SUV parked on a tropical beach. Wu Gang and a young woman got out. He opened the trunk with a flourish, looking at her expectantly. She gasped, covering her mouth in surprise. The camera zoomed in. The trunk was filled with exotic flowers arranged in a beautiful pattern. Their colors were mesmerizing, vibrant, dazzling, many of which I'd never seen before. As the trunk opened, fireworks erupted into the sky. The beautiful couple looked up, gazing at the stars, the sound of waves crashing in the background. When the fireworks faded, Wu Gang produced a bouquet of flowers, presenting it to the beaming woman. She accepted the bouquet shyly, her delicate hands like spring onions. I glanced at my own hands, rough and calloused, prone to splitting if I neglected them. They could snag the finest silk. These hands had handled steel flanges, pipe fittings, cable trays, countless nuts and bolts. They had never held a delicate bouquet. But the video wasn't over. There was a final surprise. Guided by Wu Gang, the woman found a ring hidden within the bouquet. He gently slipped it onto her finger. She jumped up and down with joy. I couldn't believe such a display of commitment could be part of such a tawdry affair. Wu Gang's shamelessness knew no bounds. Anger replaced my sadness. I asked the sender, "Who are you?" She confessed. She was the mistress. The woman in the video was the other woman. Furious at being replaced, she had decided to inform me, the wife. I immediately booked the earliest flight to their location, but they were gone. The scene on the beach had been the end of their trip. I stared at the discarded firework casings on the sand, blackened and forlorn, as if mocking me. My anger reached its peak. I flew home. As I entered the apartment, Wu Gang emerged from the kitchen, holding a bowl of beef soup. What a performance. The perfect domestic partner. Just a few hours later, he could seamlessly switch roles. I slapped him. Startled, he dropped the bowl. It shattered on the floor, soup splattering everywhere. He stood there, stunned. I stormed upstairs. He looked up at me, calling out, "Honey, what's wrong?" I walked back down, stood before him, and picked a piece of confetti from his hair. It smelled of gunpowder, residue from the fireworks. I held it out to him, flattened on my palm. His face turned ashen. He apologized profusely, promising to change, swearing it would never happen again. "Honey, I'm so sorry. I'll change, I promise." He trembled as he spoke, as if genuinely terrified of losing me. I said calmly, "Fine. I'll deal with the mistress. Stay out of it." He fell silent, as if paralyzed. After a while, he pleaded, "Honey, can we just forget about this? I'll focus on our family. I'll treat you well." "Why should I trust you?" I asked. "Do you even have any credibility left?" He choked back tears. "What do you want me to do?" My heart seethed with hatred, but my voice remained calm. "Show me some sincerity." He nodded eagerly. "Tell me what to do. I'll do it." With a hint of mockery, I said, "Write a confession letter. Admit to your infidelity, express your remorse." I knew such a letter would give me a slight advantage in a divorce settlement, but not much. At that point, I wasn't sure what else I could do to protect myself. He said, "Okay, I'll write it." As he wrote, I added, "Include a clause stating that if it happens again, you'll leave with nothing." He looked up sharply, his face filled with disbelief. He refused. I nodded, acknowledging his refusal. That was the extent of his sincerity. His apology had limits. He was already preparing for his next transgression. He started it. I would finish it. I turned and went upstairs. He called after me, "Honey, we can talk about this. Don't go. Let's discuss it." I ignored him. But then I paused. Was I really ready for a hasty divorce? No. I needed a strategic retreat. I turned back to face him. "So, if it happens again, what punishment are you willing to accept?" He took my hand, saying earnestly, "Honey, it won't happen again." I scoffed. "We're negotiating a contract here. A contract to preserve this marriage. As the guilty party, what are your terms of penalty? Why bother with the pretense of affection?" He hesitated, then said tentatively, "If it happens again, you get an extra 10% of the assets in a divorce?" I laughed. "I have proof of your infidelity. Even in court, I'm entitled to more than that." His face hardened slightly. "Then 20%? I grew impatient. "Why are you haggling like this? Don't you have any confidence in yourself? If you cheat again, I want half. Do you dare to stake that much?" He hesitated, then, desperate to appease me, he signed the agreement. It was just the first step. A temporary truce. Since he hadn't met my initial demand, I wouldn't be so lenient with his mistress. I had her roughed up, publicly humiliated, effectively ending her modeling career. But it was pointless. She was a seasoned professional. She knew how to handle wives like me. She was resilient. She appeared shaken in the video someone sent me, her hair pulled, insults hurled at her. But in the final frame, she lifted her head, tossed her hair back, a look of defiance on her face. Now that she had no job, Wu Gang became her sole provider. He kept saying he would change, but it was all lies. He'd probably calculated that giving me half his assets in a divorce would be enough to keep me secure, to keep me from leaving. He wanted to keep me because I was valuable, capable. Businesses have ups and downs. He might need me in the future. His ideal scenario was for me to turn a blind eye, to passively accept his infidelity while he retained all his assets and his valuable wife. The worst-case scenario was a divorce, but with his remaining capital, his experience, and his connections, he could easily rebuild. Using me as a springboard made everything so much easier. The more I thought about it, the more resentful I became. The wives in our social circle were interconnected. They informed me about Wu Gang supporting his mistress. At least I wouldn't be fooled anymore. I had access to information. It was pathetic that I had to rely on a mistress to learn about the other woman. And it was all Wu Gang's fault. I had trusted him completely. He had taught me a harsh lesson. I wouldn't let him get away with it. At the company's annual meeting, Wu Gang was on stage, delivering a speech. He excelled at this. Unlike us, who had clawed our way up from the bottom, he could deliver a captivating speech without notes. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Then, at the climax of his speech, the video appeared on the large screen behind him. The romantic beach scene with his mistress. He was nearing the end of his speech when he sensed the audience's reaction wasn't what he expected. He followed their gaze to the screen behind him. He watched for a moment, then turned slowly, his eyes locking onto mine. He wasn't enraged or ashamed. His eyes burned with anger and accusation. I smiled faintly, watching the scene unfold. I knew this was the point of no return. He wouldn't see his own fault. He deserved this. He would only blame me. This was a matter of character, separate from the ability to resist temptation. The lively atmosphere in the room turned deathly silent. No one knew what would happen next. I sat there calmly, watching Wu Gang freeze on stage. But Wu Gang was resourceful. His team was full of capable individuals. A newly appointed vice president, known for his smooth-talking skills, stepped up, attempting to salvage the situation. Let's hear from our esteemed Mrs. Wu. After all, she's the founder of this company. We're all here because of her. He was subtly urging me to be magnanimous, to prioritize the company's image. I walked onto the stage, taking the microphone. Blending truth and fiction, my voice choked with emotion. In this company, I said, if we're talking about dedication and contribution, I'm the one who deserves the flowers and applause, not some woman I don't even know. I stepped off the stage, feigning overwhelming emotion. Now everyone knew. Wu Gang and I were finished. Irreconcilably. The vice president stood beside me, stunned. He hadn't expected me to go this far. Having done this, I naturally wanted to oust Wu Gang as chairman. I couldn't say it outright, so I used my jealousy as a pretext. This was far more effective than demanding his resignation. Wu Gang probably didn't realize that I was also afraid of divorce. Not because I would lose him, but because he would take our resources and connections with him. I had built this empire from nothing. Sharing it with him felt deeply unfair. Even if he only took a quarter of our assets, I feared he would use it to surpass me. I wouldn't be anyone's stepping stone. That was my nature. After the incident at the annual meeting, Wu Gang could no longer maintain his position as chairman. Publicly feuding with his wife, with his brother-in-law holding a significant stake in the company, his position was untenable. He resigned, offering me the chairmanship. I thought my plan had worked. But Wu Gang was cunning. My position was precarious. I quickly realized this. The business had expanded significantly. I didn't know many of our clients. Wu Gang had cultivated those relationships. Now, I was trapped. New clients were giving me a hard time. Several board members and employees were watching my every move. Many contracts had deadlines. I couldn't solve these problems overnight. I realized I had been outmaneuvered. But it didn't matter. I had time. When Wu Gang offered me a way out, I took it. He would resume his role as chairman, but I would appoint the CFO. This meant financial transparency. His spending would be scrutinized. He could no longer lavishly support his mistress. This was his concession, his display of good faith. I retreated temporarily, planning my next move. Wu Gang behaved for a while. Whether he was truly reformed or not, I didn't care. As long as he didn't touch my money, I could bide my time. As for him, I realized I'd never truly known him. He was a stranger. Our happy years together felt like a joke. But it didn't matter. The world was a stage, and everyone encountered a few villains along the way. Mrs. Chow, a close acquaintance, offered some advice. You might feel vindicated, but you've eliminated any guilt he might have felt. As wives, we need to learn how to manage our successful husbands, like flying a kite. Knowing when to pull and when to release. That's the key to longevity. Then, as if remembering something, she added, "Oh, you're different. You built your empire yourself. It's understandable that you're resentful." She hesitated, then continued, "But you should consider the illegitimate child. He already has a son, while you have none." "What illegitimate child?" I asked, puzzled. As far as I knew, these young women, though called models, were barely that. Real models wouldn't stoop to this. These women were professional mistresses. They had their own strategies. Faced with a determined wife like me, they would grab what they could and move on, avoiding a protracted battle. Mrs. Chow, noticing my confusion, asked, "You really didn't know?" I shook my head. She sighed. "That cashier at your company, Xing Xining, your distant relative? She's your husband's secretary now. Come on, everyone knows what that means." A chill ran through me. Xing Xining's mother and my mother were cousins. We were distantly related. We rarely interacted. 2 years earlier, her mother had come to our house, weeping about their financial struggles. Xining has no education, no job. She's stuck at home, can't even find a husband. She practically begged my mother. After much pleading from my mother, I had agreed to help. I enrolled Xing Xining in accounting classes, helping her obtain the necessary certifications before offering her a job. I told her mother, "Auntie, now Xining has a skill, some work experience. She can support herself. You don't have to worry anymore." I had helped someone completely incapable of surviving in society. Xing Xining's mother had knelt before me in gratitude. And now she was stabbing me in the back? How could these people disregard basic decency, betraying kindness so easily? I quickly learned about Xing Xining's situation. A developer had given us several villas as debt offset. Villas were difficult to sell. They had been sitting on our books for a while. The villas belonged to the company. Transferring ownership was complicated, but there were no restrictions on occupancy. One of our partners was a decorating company. Wu Gang had arranged for them to renovate a villa for Xing Xining in exchange for favors elsewhere. He was supporting her with his salary. Clever. I had to admire his resourcefulness. I also learned how Xing Xining had become involved with Wu Gang. I needed to know my enemy. Apparently, seeing the constant stream of women around Wu Gang, she had decided to try her luck. He was one of the few wealthy men she had access to, conveniently delivered to her by me. Apparently, she had stopped wearing professional attire. Her supervisor, out of respect for me, hadn't reprimanded her. During the summer, rain or shine, she wore short chiffon dresses, barely reaching her knees. With the air conditioning blowing, even more leg was revealed, occasionally offering glimpses of what lay beneath. She paraded herself in front of Wu Gang. And he quickly took the bait. But back then, Wu Gang had his pick of beautiful women. Xing Xining wasn't particularly attractive. She had nothing to offer but her shamelessness. She was insignificant in his harem. He hadn't taken her seriously. But I had eliminated all the other women, leaving her as the sole remaining option. This gave her an opportunity to rise through the ranks. She provided emotional support when I was being difficult with Wu Gang, allowing him to save face. This significantly elevated her status in his eyes. He was willing to provide her with a house, to maintain a second family, even to have children with her. One day, I overheard them at a restaurant. Xing Xining was saying in a coquettish voice, "He works so hard, he's under so much pressure. Can't he relax a little? She's so controlling. Even I, as her younger sister, can't stand it. What woman acts like that, constantly? Making her man miserable? What does she gain from it? If you ask me, they should handle their problems privately, not air their dirty laundry in public. He respects her, but she doesn't appreciate it. The more he respects her, the more she takes advantage of him." They laughed. Wu Gang said lazily, with a hint of arrogance, "I like young, vibrant women. She's become a hag. I can't stand her. What am I supposed to do?" He caressed Xing Xining's face. "You're not the most beautiful, but you're feminine, you understand me. I'm content. If my wife were half as agreeable as you, we wouldn't be in this situation." Xing Xining, her face being stroked in public, cooed, "Darling." I pushed the door open. Xing Xining jumped, then quickly sat back down, realizing her impropriety. Wu Gang's face turned cold, his expression guarded. I walked up to Xing Xining and slapped her. Tears immediately welled up in her eyes. Wu Gang shot to his feet, the scraping of his chair against the floor echoing in the room. "What are you doing?" he roared, grabbing my wrist to prevent another blow. I wrenched myself free. He pulled Xing Xining behind him. "I wasn't planning to hit her again," I said loudly. "I'm correcting her. She's my distant cousin. She should be calling you brother-in-law, not darling. She doesn't even understand basic respect. Doesn't that deserve a slap?" Wu Gang was silent. I continued, "She begged me for a job, even though she had no skills. I paid for her accounting classes, gave her a job as a cashier. But I hear she wasn't very good at it, caused a lot of trouble for her colleagues. So I slapped her. Was I wrong?" I continued, "I gave her a chance to learn a skill, to earn a living through honest work. She failed to learn the skill, but she's an expert at seducing men, at betraying those who helped her. Is that something to be proud of? Is that decent behavior? I slapped her, and I don't regret it. No matter how much you protect her, you can't change the fact that she's morally bankrupt." "You." Wu Gang's face was red with rage. Xing Xining sobbed behind him. "What about me? What did I do?" I challenged him. "I should be the angry one, being associated with filth like you too." Wu Gang laughed in disbelief. "Oh, you're so virtuous, so high and mighty. We're not worthy of your company." I sneered. "Character is judged by others, not by oneself. And you're certainly not qualified to judge mine. Shut your filthy mouth." I went home. My parents, whom I had brought to live with me, must have known everything by then. My mother was asleep. My father took me aside. "Don't overreact. Your aunt took your mother to see the villa Wu Gang bought for Xining. They were bragging about how luxurious it was. They were saying you couldn't hold on to your man, that Xining was more capable. It's like they've become different people. Putting on a show. Your mother was so upset she had a spike in her blood pressure. She keeps blaming herself, saying she brought this upon us. I reassured him. Tell Mom that Wu Gang is not a good man. Xing Xining is just one of many. I can get rid of her anytime. I just don't care enough to bother. I have a plan. Don't worry. My parents had always relied on me. My father nodded. Your mother and I will take care of each other. You need to be careful. Don't be afraid to let go. Sometimes you have to lose something to gain something. You have us, you have your brother. I nodded. I know. I peeked into my mother's room. She was curled up in bed, asleep, covered with a faded, old-fashioned quilt. She had always been frugal, reluctant to replace anything. The opulence of the villa must have been a shock to her. Her hair was gray, her brow furrowed in worry. That visit to the villa must have been a deeply traumatic experience. My heart ached. My mind went blank. That was the moment I decided to destroy the company, to leave Wu Gang and his mistress with nothing. Even if it meant losing everything myself, I wouldn't hesitate. This led to the events that followed, the dismantling of the company. Years earlier, during my travels, I had visited Africa and seen opportunities there. I had established a company there in my brother's name. Sometimes, to appease me, Wu Gang would send money to my brother as a gift. Sometimes my brother would sell some of his company shares to Wu Gang. So now, my brother and I were building a new business in Africa, primarily in mining, completely separate from Wu Gang. Lin Su wasn't as capable, so I often had to manage things remotely. One day, while discussing business with him online, I received a call from the hospital. Wu Gang was awake. I was surprised. Then I realized I was still his wife, at least on paper. They would naturally notify me. On my way to his room, I encountered a group of doctors escorting Xing Xining to the doctor's office. I didn't intend to acknowledge them, but the lead doctor recognized me. He hesitated, then asked, "Are you a family member of Mr. Wu?" I gestured towards Xing Xining. She's the mother of his child. She's his family. Xing Xining didn't deny it. She looked at me smugly. I told Wu Gang everything you did. He won't let you get away with this. I couldn't help but laugh. The doctor frowned, looking at me quizzically, then led Xing Xining away. I always wore flat shoes. I approached Wu Gang's room quietly. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, his head bowed, his expression hidden. His hair was disheveled. He stared at his empty hands as if trying to conjure something from them. After a while, he looked up, his eyes vacant and unfocused, meeting my gaze. It took him a moment to register my presence. Then his expression shifted to disbelief, as if he were looking at a monster. He let out a guttural cry and lunged at me like a wild animal, but missed, collapsing onto the bed. His foreline was dislodged, blood staining the sheets. Amidst the chaos, I smiled calmly. So you know. Good. Saves me the trouble of explaining. It's just as you heard. The company is gone. You're ruined. How does it feel, this dramatic fall from grace? Look on the bright side. You're free from all burdens now. He became even more agitated, pounding his fists on the mattress. I turned to leave, no longer interested in the spectacle. Let's finalize the divorce paperwork soon. He looked up sharply. Why? Why? What a strange question. Why did I go through all this trouble? To divorce you and make you poor, of course. It seemed self-evident. But you lost everything too, he shouted, his anger laced with confusion. Me? I did it for fun, I said with a smirk. I love truth, not money. I might have lost money, but I won a spiritual victory. My voice dripped with mockery, my eyes full of malice. And why should you get to use me as a stepping stone, then discard me? Why should I make things easy for you? You wasted my youth, crushed my dreams, and lied to me throughout our marriage. You've done too many wrong things. This is your karma. My words were laced with venom. I turned and walked away without another glance. As for his condition, let him face his fate. I had no interest in his well-being. Come back here. I'm telling you, I'm not getting a divorce. I'll drag this out till we both die. His venomous curses echoed behind me. I loathed his audacity, the way he played the victim. So I turned back. Stopping a short distance from him, I said, "You're legally illiterate. The evidence of your infidelity is overwhelming, more than enough to prove our marriage has irretrievably broken down. The moment I file, the divorce will be granted swiftly." I twisted the knife further. "And, while I'm still feeling generous, you should just agree to the divorce and save yourself the trouble. Otherwise, my lawyer is currently gathering evidence of your bigamy. That villa you share with Xingxining? The property registration lists you both as husband and wife. Once I have enough evidence, you won't get away with this." I glared at him fiercely, as if trying to bore holes through him with my eyes. He glared back with equal venom. After 2 such standoffs, he was the one who finally broke. His eyes darted away, unable to meet my gaze. On the day we signed the divorce agreement, Wu Gang seemed much calmer. Our current assets totaled 8 million. According to standard marital property division, I would receive 4.5 million, and he would get 3.5 million. As the guilty party, he deserved less. I made this clear to him. 3.5 million is not a small sum. It's more than you'd earn working your entire life at a state-owned enterprise. See, no matter how you betrayed me, I haven't wronged you. You left the state-owned enterprise to join me, and although you made so many mistakes, I'm simply returning you to where you started. As for how you live your life from now on, that's no longer my concern." He was in his 30s. With retirement at 60, he only had about 20-odd years left. When he left the state-owned enterprise, he was just a minor manager with limited connections. Promotions are slow in state-owned enterprises, so 3.5 million was enough to buy out the rest of his career. Initially, I had intended to squander all our assets, leaving nothing behind. But our holdings were substantial, and I couldn't achieve such precision in a short time. Overdoing it and ending up in debt would be unwise. Besides, after some calculations, I realized it was best to keep some funds for myself. So, this was the outcome. Finally, I summarized, I believe in doing things properly, from beginning to end. From the moment we got together until now, I haven't wronged you in the slightest. But look at yourself, is there a single thing you've done that hasn't betrayed me? I did leave him some money, but if I hadn't, I would have gained nothing, which would have been detrimental to my future development. After signing the divorce agreement, he kept looking out the window, his eyes vacant, lost in thought. Hearing my words, he turned to look at me. "I never wanted a divorce. You can ask Shinin, when did I ever say I'd divorce you to marry her? Never, not once." I laughed. "Oh? So not divorcing me was some kind of favor? Does not divorcing me make you a good man? Don't I deserve a healthy marriage?" He was speechless. Only after the divorce was finalized could I focus on my own career. I contacted former clients, proposing to take on their waterproofing projects. Initially, they were hesitant, giving me non-committal answers. Armed with a new formula I had developed earlier, I was confident. I offered them terms they couldn't refuse: a performance bond increased from 10% to 25%, a 5-year guarantee against leaks, and maintenance for the following 5 years, or the bond would be forfeited. The day I signed the contract, I left their office and, seeing it was still early, headed to the building next door to visit a new client. Stepping out of the elevator, I ran into Wu Gang, confronting the receptionist. The receptionist said impatiently, "I've told you, no matter how many times you come, it's useless. Without an appointment from Mr. Sun, I can't let you in." She then gave Wu Gang a scathing look, filled with disdain and contempt. Wu Gang's desire to argue vanished. He deflated like a punctured balloon. Seeing me, he was startled. Embarrassed to be caught in such a predicament, he fled. The receptionist breathed a sigh of relief, glanced at me, and offered an explanation. This man, he's so thick-skinned. He just wouldn't listen. Please, come with me. The meeting room is ready for you. Mr. Sun greeted me personally. I've heard you have excellent waterproofing materials. I have a large project coming up, but you'd need to complete a few smaller projects as a trial first. Would you agree to that? Agree? Of course, I agreed. I left Mr. Sun's office, elated. My phone rang. It was an important call. Not wanting to rush, I walked to a less crowded area of the building and answered. The person on the other end was speaking, and I was listening. Suddenly, I caught sight of Wu Gang squatting nearby, sobbing. His cries were muffled, his chest heaving. It seemed even more sorrowful than loud wailing. The person on the phone, hearing no response from me, assumed there was a signal problem and raised their voice. Hello? Hello? The loud voice startled Wu Gang. He looked up, saw me, and panicked. Unable to maintain his composure, he wiped his tears and tried to escape. He realized I was blocking his only exit. He walked towards me awkwardly. As we passed, he hesitated for a moment, as if wanting to say something, but ultimately said nothing and quickly left. Watching him go, I imagined he probably wanted to say that while he'd struggled to land clients before, he'd never been subjected to such open disdain. In the past, he'd just had to schmooze and network. This time, he experienced firsthand that the lower you sink, the more unpleasant people become. He was truly suffering. My fast-moving consumer goods business was doing well. After 5 years, I was finally qualified to secure the distribution rights for Yungue Pharmaceuticals herbal tea. By then, my sales channels were well established. These connections and experiences were assets that couldn't be divided in a divorce. As the saying goes, ambition should start early. I had planned for this divorce for years. I couldn't have endured such humiliation for nothing. After the first batch of products achieved excellent sales, I took the local staff to a hotel for a team-building dinner. There were only a few suitable restaurants in my mind. I chose one nearby, and that's where I ran into Wu Gang. He was in the room next door. In a room full of men, smoking was inevitable, so the doors were mostly left open. I clearly heard Wu Gang trying to secure investments, drinking heavily in the process. He flattered everyone, showering them with praise. 1 or 2 companies seemed interested. This was the nature of the industry, deals were often made over drinks. Furthermore, Wu Gang's past performance was well known, which gave him some credibility. I pondered for a moment, suspecting that these interested companies were unlikely to invest, but what if they did? What if he actually succeeded in securing investment? So, after returning home, I called Mr. Zhang, the mentor who had brought me into the industry. I had always respected him, giving him generous red envelopes during holidays. However, Wu Gang had deeply offended him once and hadn't offered a sincere apology. I told Mr. Zhang that Wu Gang was busy seeking investment and asked him to consider what should be done. The implication was clear, I wanted him to prevent Wu Gang's success. Sure enough, news of Wu Gang being blacklisted in the industry soon spread. This eased half of my worries. The other half remained. I feared Wu Gang might still manage to achieve something, and if he did, he wouldn't let me off the hook. He was the type to remember only the bad, never the kindness or favors. I knew this all too well. So, I took the initiative. I set a trap for him. Whether he took the bait was up to him. I casually mentioned to several acquaintances that I was going to Africa to check on my company's operations there. I emphasized that the situation in Africa was promising, and my main purpose wasn't just auditing but exploring new business opportunities. These acquaintances also knew Wu Gang. Through the grapevine, he learned about my trip to Africa. He knew I had a company to run domestically, with new businesses flourishing. Why would I leave all that to go to Africa? Was there a chance to make a fortune? This inevitably piqued his interest. He called me. I need to audit the accounts. Who knows if you've used our marital assets to invest in the African company? I want to go there and investigate personally. I've already arranged for lawyers and accountants to be on video call with me at any time. I readily agreed. Sure, you can go. I'll cooperate. But I won't be responsible for your expenses. Wu Gang and I took the same flight to Africa. Jing Xining, perhaps fearing that Wu Gang and I would rekindle our relationship during the trip, tagged along. On the plane, my seat was across the aisle from Wu Gang and Jing Xining, fairly close. Before takeoff, the plane was a chaotic scene of passengers and luggage. Local Africans had mountains of luggage, jostling and shouting. Finally, most people were seated, but it was still a while before takeoff. To Jing Xining's left sat a thin, dark young African man. To her right sat Wu Gang. I was next to the aisle, with a large African woman on my other side. She was so large that her flesh spilled over the armrest, pressing against me uncomfortably. Jing Xining, able to see me with a simple turn of her head, said with a smug smile, "Sister, you've shot yourself in the foot. In the past, we could all have flown first class." I smiled back. Even in the past, I wouldn't have indulged in first class. An international first-class ticket costs over 60,000 yuan. I would never spend that kind of money. This is the mindset of a self-made entrepreneur. So, this situation is definitely more uncomfortable for you. Her face paled, and she turned away angrily. Soon after, trouble brewed on her side. The thin young man next to her started taking off his clothes. After removing his shirt, he started on his pants. Jing Xining, who had been tolerating the situation until now, jumped up and screamed. The shriek was so piercing that a flight attendant rushed over. But it was no use. They couldn't understand each other. The flight attendant didn't speak Chinese, and Jing Xining didn't speak English. Wu Gang's English, once fluent, had atrophied from disuse. Moreover, Jing Xining, standing there gesturing frantically, kept turning around, her backside practically in his face. Several times, her rear end brushed against his nose, forcing him to dodge. The flight attendant grew increasingly impatient, looking at them as if they were idiots. This wasn't a high-end airline, the staff weren't particularly well-trained. Seeing other passengers watching the spectacle with amusement, I decided to put aside our personal animosity and offer some assistance. I spoke to the young man in fluent English, confirming my suspicions. Turning to Jing Xining, I explained, "He's a personal shopper, bringing clothes back to Africa to sell. He uses his checked and carry-on luggage, but for any excess weight, he wears the clothes." He wasn't being disrespectful. He was just taking off the merchandise. These aren't his clothes, they're goods he's taking back to sell. Jing Xining stared at me, stunned, forgetting to reply. She instinctively looked at Wu Gang. Wu Gang frowned. He kept taking things off, but his body remained covered. "I was about to tell you not to overreact, but you blew up." Jing Xining became upset. "Your English is terrible. You didn't say a word." Wu Gang was speechless. While Wu Gang's English might be revived, Jing Xining was a poor student, her English practically non-existent. How could she criticize him? I was reminded of Wu Gang's talent for playing the victim. It seemed that even villains had their nemesis. I returned to my seat. After the first meal, I told the flight attendant not to bring me any more food. I wanted to sleep. The seat was too small, and the woman next to me was crowding me. I took a sleeping pill I had prepared in advance and drifted off. Sometimes, I felt myself leaning against the woman beside me. Other times, I heard commotion from Jing Xining's side, unsure what was happening. Mostly, I slept soundly, unaware of my surroundings, oblivious to discomfort. When the plane landed and we were disembarking, Wu Gang, walking behind me, said stiffly, "Do you have any more sleeping pills?" Could I have one for the return flight? I gave him a chilling smile, hoping he would still be able to sleep on the way back. I had told Wu Gang he could audit my accounts in Africa, but I also stated I wouldn't be responsible for his expenses. Perhaps he hadn't realized the significance of that statement at the time and hadn't made proper arrangements. Upon arrival, the reality of the situation quickly set in. He had managed to contact someone from the local Chamber of Commerce to receive him. However, being unfamiliar with the area, he undoubtedly faced inconveniences. I next encountered them at my hotel. My brother and I had started a business here. The mining business was feast or famine. Recent years had been lean for mining, so we opened a hotel. This hotel was simply land by the lake with dozens of small buildings. Every 10 buildings formed a courtyard, several courtyards clustered together, with pools or gardens in between, a typical local layout. Running it wasn't difficult, but what made it special was my established presence and ability to secure a stable power supply, a rarity in the area. I was sitting at the bar by the hotel reception, enjoying a drink. Several local Africans were already drinking, lending the lobby a relaxed, carefree atmosphere. That's when Jing Xining and Wu Gang walked in. Not seeing me, Jing Xining exclaimed, "What a beautiful place. It's like paradise." "Wu Gang, I want to stay here." Wu Gang sighed and patted her hand. "I'll ask about the price." He approached the bar cautiously and asked in broken English, "Excuse me, how much is it per night?" The receptionist glanced at me, as if to say, "Boss, your fellow countryman is here." I looked down, ignoring him. Wu Gang, noticing me, seemed relieved. As if my presence validated the quality of the hotel, putting his mind at ease. The receptionist told him $150 per night. His eyebrows twitched. The price was clearly steep for him. We had been there for 2 days, adjusting to the time difference. But that was enough time for him to learn about local prices. The poor were truly poor, while the wealthy lived in a different world, with correspondingly high prices. He turned to Jing Xining. "Let's stay at Lao Qian's place. This is too expensive, and I'm not staying just for 2 days." Jing Xining's face fell. "Wu Gang, I've endured so much coming here with you, and I haven't complained. I'm willing to suffer with you. Lin Shi can do it, so can I. But look at Lin Shi, isn't she staying here? At Lao Qian's, there's no water one day, no electricity the next, and then both on the third. I can't stand it anymore. I'm not asking for much. Just let us stay here for a few days so I can recover, and then we can go back to Lao Qian's." Wu Gang frowned, his expression displeased. "If we leave Lao Qian's, how can we go back? Saying their place is too shabby, we just needed a break, and then returning? Should Lao Qian just put up with our disruptions? Don't you understand these social niceties?" Jing Xining's eyes welled up with tears. "You only criticize me. You don't understand my difficulties at all." Wu Gang sighed again, a deep, weary sigh. His face was etched with worry. "I told you not to come, but you insisted. You're such a burden." Jing Xining started to cry. "Yurimi? You're already getting impatient? What have I done? Just spending a little money, am I dragging you down? Is it really that bad?" Wu Gang opened his mouth to speak but ultimately remained silent. I guessed he wanted to say, "It is that bad. The few million we have isn't going to last forever." But he just shook his head and sighed. I noticed he sighed a lot these days. What did he have to sigh about? He still had millions, far better off than when we started with nothing. It was just the bitterness of falling from grace. I wanted him to suffer. That was my goal. To make him endure hardship, to make him uncomfortable, to make him resentful. Internal turmoil, emotional ups and downs, self-destruction. Everything I had suffered, I wanted him to experience it all. He finally decided to stay, paying for 10 days up front. He discovered that he could pay with WeChat. After the transfer, my phone chimed, "You have received 10,000 yuan." He looked up at me sharply, stunned. Xing Xining, noticing something amiss, looked over too. I nodded. "This hotel is mine. You haven't paid the wrong person." Xing Xining jumped up and down. "Lin Shi, you hid marital assets. I deserve a share of this hotel." Before I could speak, Wu Gang said, his voice laced with bitterness, "Lin Shi wouldn't do such a thing. If I'm not mistaken, this must be the money I gave to my mother-in-law. She must have given it to Lin Shi to build this hotel. No wonder she always insisted on labeling it as a voluntary gift. Lin Shi, were you planning to leave me that early? Planning to divide the assets, to squander everything so I'd be left with nothing? Is that it?" I scoffed. "Not any earlier than you betrayed me. Actually, I've always wanted to ask you, when did you first betray me? When did you first sleep with Xing Xining? Did you think of me then? What were you thinking at that time?" It was laughable. If I didn't bring it up, their behavior would be swept under the rug, and they had the audacity to question me. How dare they? Wu Gang's expression shifted dramatically, a mixture of pain, regret, and resentment. He covered his face to hide his emotions. The second night after Wu Gang and Xing Xining checked in, I was relaxing by the pool. The slow pace of life here suited me. Without the hustle and bustle of the city, the world was quiet, only the gentle sound of flowing water, truly relaxing. When Wu Gang approached, I assumed it was a waiter bringing me fruit. Playing with my phone, I said casually, "Leave it there." Seeing I hadn't dismissed him, he sat down beside me. I looked up and met his intense gaze. "I'm wondering, before you ruined the company, how much did you set aside for yourself to make a comeback?" How irritating. He had a knack for ruining the mood. I chuckled lightly. "Don't be envious. It's just a small business. The golden age of the construction industry is over. You should just settle down and live your life." But he wouldn't listen. "I'll work hard. What you can do, I can do too. It's just starting over, right?" I didn't argue, it was pointless. He persisted. "Do you look down on me?" I smiled. "Whether I look down on you or not is irrelevant. As long as your wife thinks highly of you, that's enough. Our paths diverge now." He suddenly seemed dejected. He didn't apologize, didn't express regret, just lowered his head, silent. As I was about to leave, he spoke, "Afraid I would go. Even heroes are ordinary people. I didn't realize it before, but standing where I am now, I see how much more capable you are than others. Now that I've calmed down, I realize you had the courage to tear everything down and start anew. If our positions were reversed, I couldn't do it. You didn't want us to benefit, did you? Me, the mistress, the illegitimate child. You think we all took advantage of you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Aren't we?" He pursed his lips, thought for a moment, and nodded, finally admitting, "Yes, I used your influence. Those women outside basely extracted value from you." I stopped mocking him and nodded in agreement. "It's rare for you to admit that. I thought, with your personality, you'd probably resent me forever." He looked up sharply, as if I had struck a nerve. Then he shifted his position and continued the conversation, perhaps realizing this might be our last chance to talk. "You are like a rainbow, a rare and beautiful sight. It's a pity I didn't cherish it." He shook his head and smiled bitterly. "I always thought you and the other women each had your strengths. You were generous, capable, and a good wife and homemaker. The other women were either beautiful and gentle, or fiery and passionate, and then there was Xing Xining, subservient and compliant, suitable as a mistress." His smile grew even more bitter. "Standing where I am now, I understand the vast difference between you. You have the ability to change your destiny, while they are just parasitic vines, dependent on men for survival. As for Xing Xining, one day I suddenly realized she's completely unremarkable. Utterly ordinary. Honestly, we're not married yet. For the sake of our 2 children, marrying her wasn't out of the question. But I feel it would be beneath me. I'm a graduate of a prestigious university. And her? A vocational school graduate. I could have picked anyone at random from a crowd and found someone better. Her character is too flawed. Tell me, how did I ever fall for her? I burst out laughing. If your wife hears you saying these things, it'll just cause more trouble. Why bother? I'm tired. I'm going to bed. He waved his hand dismissively, urging me to sit and continue chatting. Under the intoxicating night sky, he was willing to set aside our animosity and engage in this philosophical discussion. It was a rare occurrence. So I continued to listen to his flattery. The more he spoke, the smoother he became, losing all traces of awkwardness. I was blinded by superficial beauty. To even compare you to them, wasn't that itself an insult? I was terribly wrong. Don't worry, I'm not here begging for your forgiveness, asking you to take me back. I understand that you went to such great lengths to ruin me, you never intended to reconcile. From now on, we can only be strangers. He suddenly laughed, tears mingling with his laughter. I'm laughing at myself. I used to think I was a success. And having many women was a symbol of a man's success. Others had them, so I should too. But in reality, fleeting romances are the most damaging to a man's fortune. You hold a unique place in my heart, a place no one else can ever fill. I thought I understood this, and you did too. So, I figured, more or less, you wouldn't mind those other women. I was presumptuous. I thought having a bevy of beauties was the greatest pleasure in life, and since I was successful, I had to experience it. My mistake was wanting it all. I wanted both the pleasures and a good wife. How could I be so greedy? I rested on my laurels, built on your hard work, and yet I didn't respect you, the true hero. I was far too arrogant. I was inwardly wary. His self-reflection wasn't necessarily a good thing. The more clear-headed he became, the closer he was to success. Despite his pleasant words, he was a threat. I hoped my plans hadn't been in vain. I had no interest in hearing more. I'm going to bed. If your wife wakes up and hears you saying these things, there's bound to be a scene. Let the past be the past. Don't go yet, just 2 more sentences. He wouldn't let me leave, insisting I listen. He had said more heartfelt words in these few minutes than in the past few years combined. She won't wake up. Look at her, she comes from a humble background, lacks ability, and talks about enduring hardship with me, but it's all for show. She can't handle any real hardship. I contacted someone from the Chamber of Commerce beforehand. Though I'm new here, at least I have someone to rely on. The living conditions are a bit rough, I told her that. Before we came. But her? It's not that she's deliberately causing trouble, because she's in a bad mood, she genuinely can't stand hardship. She can't sleep without washing her hair, stays up all night, feels drowsy during the day, and anxiously waits for the water and electricity to come back on so she can wash her hair. Lao Qian's family is waiting for the water to come back so they can store some. What can I say about her? Now, in a comfortable environment, she's sleeping like a log, as if she hasn't slept in centuries. He lowered his gaze and spoke again, just as my patience was wearing thin. Is our relationship this bad because of her? If we hadn't had children, would you have simply divorced me and moved on? He looked at me earnestly, desperate for an answer. I gave it to him frankly. Yes, with anyone else, it would have just been a divorce. Not mutual destruction. He laughed bitterly. I knew it. Then, his laughter grew wilder, until he was hunched over. Seeing him lose control like this gave me a sense of satisfaction. He regained his composure and said wistfully, I pushed you too far. Forced you to take drastic measures. A hero like you, how could you endure such humiliation? I basked in the Glory you earned, but I didn't respect you, the one who truly deserved it. I thought success came so easily, that you were nothing special. I misjudged you. I was spoiled. As I turned to leave, he said behind me, "It's a pity life doesn't offer second chances. I have no way back." A pity, indeed. Everyone has the right to say that, except him. If it weren't for him, my business wouldn't have to be rebuilt from scratch. If anyone deserves a second chance, a fresh start, it's me, not him. I wished I had never met him. At least, I shouldn't have married him during the crucial stages of my business. The divorce wouldn't have been so complicated. He has the nerve to talk about regrets. I hadn't even said the words myself. On the fourth day, Wu Gang came to my company to audit the accounts. As he had said, even though I ruined the company, I intended to divide the assets within the legal framework of the divorce. I wouldn't resort to underhanded tactics. He knew the audit would be fruitless, yet he still came, putting on a show. He made video calls to his lawyers and accountants, showing them my books. I knew he was trying to glean my business secrets. The domestic construction industry was becoming increasingly competitive. Just maintaining existing business was difficult, let alone starting from scratch like him. It was clear he wanted to make a name for himself in Africa. Nowadays, making a fortune relied on three things, one of which was taking paths others dared not. As he looked through the accounts, he gradually understood my business. Through the video calls, my client information was leaked. I knew his intentions, and I had my own agenda. Africa was rife with scammers, and newly arrived Chinese were prime targets. They attracted scammers like flies to honey. I brought him here, setting a trap. He was cautious, however. He returned to China without making any moves. I followed soon after. My brother told me that Wu Gang returned to Africa alone later, scouting locations, considering leasing land for mining. But for some reason, he left without doing anything. I was disappointed. Wu Gang was indeed capable. Despite his desire for success, he could see the reality and resist temptation. He could actually resist human nature. I felt a strong sense of defeat. Around that time, my mother told me that, according to relatives, Jing Shinin had lost more than half of Wu Gang's business funds in the stock market. So that was it. Wu Gang hadn't fallen for the traps in Africa because Jing Shinin had squandered his money. Perhaps it was a blessing in disguise. Losing money in the stock market was better than losing everything in Africa. But Wu Gang didn't see it that way. He felt betrayed by Jing Shinin and constantly demanded she repay him. He then used the remaining money to rent a storefront in the hardware and electrical district, mimicking my early business, selling hardware. One day, I went to the district to purchase supplies. My client and I agreed to meet near Wu Gang's shop. While waiting, I overheard a heated argument between Wu Gang and Jing Shinin. Wu Gang angrily questioned her, "We haven't made a single sale in days. What are you even doing here?" Jing Shinin complained, "Business is tough now. Times have changed. You can't keep comparing me to Lin Shi." Wu Gang suddenly fell silent, then said sarcastically, "You want to compare yourself to Lin Shi? How dare you? She's a true powerhouse. You couldn't dream of having her skills. Don't ever mention Lin Shi to me, you're not in her league. If you want to compare yourself to someone, compare yourself to Mrs. Li next door, her sales skills are far superior to yours. Maybe you should just go home and take care of the kids. I'll poach Mrs. Li to help me run the shop." Jing Shinin sniffled, tears streaming down her face. "My relatives have always looked down on me, and now you're doing the same. Let me tell you, Wu Gang, if it weren't for the children, I wouldn't bother with you. If you hire Mrs. Li, can you even afford to pay her?" Wu Gang was furious. "If I hire Mrs. Li, or any other employee, my shop might have a chance. With you here, I'm doomed. You're mediocre, just admit it. It's not that people look down on you, it's that you're truly incompetent. Face reality." Xing Xining suddenly laughed coldly. The only thing I've ever won over Lin Shi is you. I should thank you for cooperating. Otherwise, I could never have beaten her. Wu Gang fell silent. Then, I heard a man's sobs coming from inside the shop. I'm sorry, Lin Shi. My filth tainted your dreams. You did the right thing by ruining the company. I deserve this, it's my comeuppance. For the first time ever, I heard Wu Gang apologize to me. He had said sorry before, but it was just to appease me, a temporary measure. He'd quickly gone back to his mistress. This was the first time his apology sounded genuinely remorseful. He was the type who would never admit defeat. Even if he realized his mistakes, he wouldn't apologize. Moreover, he had a habit of shifting blame. Although I wasn't there, and they didn't know I was listening, I heard a hint of sincerity in his repentance. It was truly a rare occurrence. Later, I ran into Wu Gang several times at various construction sites. Just as Vice President Zhang had predicted, the hardware business became increasingly difficult. So, when I saw Wu Gang, he was either waiting hopelessly, being ignored, or being dragged out of someone's office. The expression on his face changed from initial embarrassment to numbness. He looked more and more like a beggar, exuding an air of despair. Passing by his hardware store again, I heard another fierce argument inside. This time was different. Wu Gang and Xing Xining had abandoned all pretense of civility, resorting to a barrage of insults. The air was thick with vulgarities. I quickly left the scene. I had to pass by again on my way back. This time, I saw Wu Gang's 2 children. They were adorable, but dirty, wearing clothes that were too small, the pant legs hanging loosely. I couldn't help but smile, imagining their previous lives attending private kindergarten and expensive extracurricular classes. Xing Xining's mother led the children into the shop, preoccupied with finding someone, oblivious to my presence nearby. I overheard their family drama once again. Xing Xining's mother, my aunt, shouted, Wu Gang, I don't care how you run your business, you must pay for Xiaobao's kindergarten and Debao's tutoring classes. Wu Gang snorted. I don't have any money. You can have my life. Zhang's mother broke down. Wu Gang, these are your children. You have a responsibility. They're living at my house now, and I'm using my pension to support them. Is this how you treat me? For the past 2 years, you've been messing around, neglecting your children. They're constantly in and out of school and the hospital. Have you ever cared? It's always been my husband and me running around. I've aged so much in these 2 years, my hair has turned white, can't you see? Do you have any conscience? The battle-hardened Wu Gang snorted again. When your daughter was seducing me, you didn't have this attitude. Every time I went to your house, you practically worshipped me. Now you're kicking me while I'm down? Let me tell you, I won't fall for it. Zhang's mother collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. You heartless man. How did our family end up with you? Unmoved, Wu Gang said carelessly, I had a chance to make a comeback, but your daughter lost it all in the stock market. Now you're asking me for money? I don't have any. Go ask your daughter. Seeing that crying was useless, Zhang's mother's sobs subsided. She composed herself and said, my daughter is like this, she's always been incompetent. You knew that when you married her, and now you're complaining. Wu Gang scoffed. Incompetent? She's very capable. I never intended to have anything to do with her, but she relentlessly pursued me. Tell me, since you're short on money, why doesn't she go sell herself? That's what she's good at. Zhang's mother tried to speak again, but Wu Gang cut her off. She could make a lot of money that way. Tell her to remember to pay me back for the money she cost me. I still want to invest in Africa. I was shocked. I had anticipated their infighting, but not this level of viciousness. Zhang's mother suddenly fell silent. Then, Wu Gang's voice came, hey, don't faint on me now, my kids still depend on you. Is it your chest or your head? Forget it, I'll just call an ambulance. There was no more drama to witness, so I left. Later, I heard that Jang's mother had suffered a stroke and been hospitalized. Fortunately, she received timely treatment and recovered. However, the responsibility of caring for her grandchildren still fell on her shoulders, enduring hardships day in and day out. Perhaps it would have been better if her condition had been more severe. During the busiest time of the year, I received a long text message from Wu Gang. Because of its length, it wasn't filtered as spam. He still didn't apologize or express regret, but he told me about his future plans, each word laced with unspoken remorse. It's funny how many people regret their actions only after being punished. Before getting caught, they show no remorse. Wu Gang was the same. If I hadn't taken action, he'd probably still be scheming against me, forcing me to endure the humiliation without daring to mention divorce. Wu Gang wrote that he was going south, to a different city, for a fresh start. Though he was familiar with the local community, everyone had witnessed his downfall, mocking him with ill intentions. He said he had watched a video about a fugitive who, unable to use his ID, worked illegally on construction sites for over a decade and eventually became a wealthy man. He planned to endure hardships and build a new empire. He said he would return triumphantly, confident in his abilities. He then added, "If I succeed, and become your equal, will you give me another chance?" Reading that, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. He actually had such delusions. He thought that because I had punished him, we were even, and everything could be forgotten. Did he think I had no regrets about dismantling the empire I had painstakingly built, just to drag him down with me out of spite? I wanted to devour him, flesh and bone. Adults just didn't express such sentiments openly. Where did he get the confidence that I would forgive and forget? Just because we had a civil conversation by the pool that night, he thought I'd give him another chance. That conversation was a trap, designed to lure him in. My mother told me that as soon as Wu Gang left, Jing Shinin also disappeared. Whether they went to the same place was unknown. Much later, Wu Gang sent me another message, not mentioning his location, just a single sentence. True strength lies in daring to start a business, to be a pioneer, and to have the courage to rebuild everything from scratch. I admire you. Linshi, I'm also building a business from the ground up now. It's hard, really hard. What I said before about understanding you was just superficial. Only after experiencing it myself do I realize it's like living in hell. I will persevere, strengthen my will, define my goals, and reinvent myself. I accepted his compliment, I deserved it. A true heroine isn't someone who only focuses on her career after a heartbreak. She always knows what she wants, the price she has to pay, and she perseveres relentlessly, never losing sight of her original aspiration. I didn't need his remorse. As for him, he could go wherever he wanted, as long as he stayed out of my sight. On my birthday, I went to the seaside in a neighboring city and put on a grand fireworks display for myself. Beautiful, enormous fireworks lit up the sky. I jumped with joy, like a fool. People are happiest when they act foolishly. There were times I felt incredibly depressed, silently enduring immense emotional pain. Watching Wu Gang and his mistress squander my hard-earned money, I felt suicidal. Wu Gang had once put on a fireworks show for his favorite mistress at a seaside resort in the south. When we were poor, he had made the same promise to me, but when he finally could fulfill it, I wasn't the recipient. I had been tormented by all sorts of negative emotions, far from the calm exterior I projected. Now, I had finally let go, putting on this long-awaited fireworks show for myself. It was a bit lonely being alone, but who wasn't lonely? As the fireworks display progressed, the noise subsided. My neck started to ache from constantly looking up. I tilted my head and noticed a man standing nearby. Who would come to this desolate beach in the dead of winter? I observed his attire, he was clearly wealthy. At least he wasn't homeless. I was slightly concerned about my safety being alone. He walked over and asked with a smile, "Enjoying the fireworks by yourself?" I nodded, inwardly scoffing. What was wrong with being alone? He had a commanding presence, but his expression was kind. He chatted casually with me. I was driving by and saw the fireworks. I love fireworks too, so I stopped to watch. Hope you don't mind me crashing your show. I shook my head. He extended his hand. He Jingtian. My goodness, if I remembered correctly, He Jingtian was a construction tycoon in the neighboring city. I quickly shook his hand and offered him my business card. He readily added me on WeChat. I had several business ventures I wanted to expand to the neighboring city. This was a chance to connect with a prominent figure. The future looked promising. As he was leaving, He Jingtian asked, "Are you Lin Shi from the next city?" My reputation had indeed spread far and wide. I was known as a formidable woman, a force to be reckoned with among many men. I knew this already. But being recognized by such a powerful figure was still somewhat embarrassing. I wondered if I could still connect with him after this. I looked at He Jingtian anxiously. He opened his car door, about to get in, then paused, turned back, and gave me a thumbs up. "You're amazing. I look forward to getting to know you. Feel free to reach out if you need anything." My heart felt like it was exploding with fireworks. 3 years passed quickly, and my career returned to its peak. Though not as impressive as when I was with Wu Gang, it was still substantial. After all, times had changed. Those were the most prosperous years for the construction industry. So, my current achievements were still commendable. My mother brought me more news. Zhang Xining and Wu Gang had been gone for 3 years, without a word. Zhang's mother struggled to raise their 2 children. Zhang's father, obsessed with fishing and utterly incompetent, could only offer minimal help. Then, Zhang's mother, my aunt, the woman who had once gloated over my mother, suffered another stroke. This time it was severe, reportedly leaving her with facial paralysis and bedridden. The children needed care. Zhang Xining finally returned. But a strange thing happened. The very night she returned, Wu Gang's parents, who had been feigning illness and living in Hainan, suddenly reappeared, claiming to be suffering from severe asthma. The next day, they took the children away. Relatives were puzzled, rumors swirling. Wu Gang sent me a message warning me, Zhang Xining contracted a disease while selling herself, an incurable one. Be careful, she wants revenge, and you're her most likely target. She's been contacting me for years, I've ignored her, but I know what she's thinking. She's consumed with jealousy and hatred for ruining her dream of being a wealthy wife. I was genuinely afraid and hired bodyguards to accompany me everywhere. One day, in an underground parking garage, a figure lunged at me, seemingly wielding a weapon. After giving birth, I had taken self-defense classes while working out at the gym. Now, those skills came in handy. I threw the attacker over my shoulder and pinned them to the ground. It was Zhang Xining. Pinned down, she still clutched a syringe, swinging it wildly. My bodyguards rushed forward and subdued her. We called the police. Zhang Xining would be spending a long time behind bars. She had indeed contracted a disease. Wu Gang's parents, fearing for their grandchildren, had returned to take them away. I didn't understand her hatred for me. But people like her always blamed others, never taking responsibility for their own actions. I had learned that firsthand. Wu Gang and she were the same kind of people. That's why they were together. No conscience, no morals, no values. I saw Wu Gang again when I took my child to the hospital. I rushed out of the car, flustered. There had been a series of infectious diseases lately, leaving me exhausted. I didn't notice when Wu Gang appeared. I got out of the driver's seat, about to retrieve my child from the back, and there he was. He looked at least 15 years older, like he was in his 50s. He had once said that the hardships I endured were etched on my face, making me look old. Now, thanks to good skincare, those traces were gone. His words now applied to him. I didn't know what he had experienced, but he had aged rapidly. He held up a diamond ring, large and dazzling, looking at me with pride, his eyes almost childlike in their clarity. Lin-shi, I've endured all kinds of hardships these years, starting as a laborer on construction sites. Now I'm a foreman again. I have money, I've fulfilled my promise, I'm your equal. So, will you give me another chance? I sighed inwardly. Just when I thought I was rid of one crazy person, another one appeared. What was it with me and these people? Before I could speak, He Jingtian's luxury car pulled up. He was 5 years older than me, but he looked 10 years younger than Wu Gang. He hurried over, gently reproaching me. Your child is sick, why didn't you call me? I explained softly, didn't you have an important meeting today? He countered, what's more important than you and our child? I explained further, I received a sudden call from the kindergarten teacher and rushed over. I even forgot to call the driver. He gave me another reproachful look. You're such a scatterbrain. I don't know what to do with you. I'll be the emergency contact for the kindergarten from now on. You're unreliable. I lowered my head, accepting my fate without protest. He Jingtian had already gathered the child's belongings, put on the backpack, and carried the child out of the car. I stood beside him empty-handed. He seemed to notice Wu Gang for the first time, glancing at him casually. Who's this? I remembered him and said curtly, my ex-husband. Wu Gang froze, staring at me in disbelief, stumbling back, his expression a mixture of laughter and tears. I rushed here. I didn't know. Of course, why would you wait for me? He dropped his arm dejectedly. The ring clattered to the ground. Then he fled, disappearing quickly. He Jingtian grumbled, haven't you learned your lesson from the Jingxining incident? Letting these lunatics get near you. I nudged him with my foot and said through gritted teeth, if you keep nagging like a monk, I'll deal with you when we get home. He wisely shut up. The next I heard of Wu Gang, he was seriously ill, suffering from organ failure. Rumors spread that he had pushed himself too hard in his pursuit of success, severely damaging his health. I heard the news at a business dinner, finding the gossip annoying. Wu Gang's name no longer stirred any emotions within me. He was a complete stranger. He did video call me once. I answered impatiently, not giving him a chance to speak, cutting him off immediately. I heard you've made some money. You're not calling to ask me for help with your medical bills, are you? He choked back a sob and managed to say, Lin-shi, I'm sorry. For all these years, I'm sorry. Facing death, he sought absolution. He hadn't shown me any mercy when he was on top. So I said coldly, I don't accept your apology, Wu Gang. Not every sorry deserves a response.